From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Beres here on a Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. We have a good show, as always, on tap to kick off the week. This morning, we're going to be talking about law enforcement. We're going to be talking about what's happening in our jails, especially specifically today, the Davidson County Jail, because of something new that's about to get going in there. But as always, we can go beyond that and open up the phone lines for you to join in the conversation, because a lot of you have questions oftentimes for Davidson County Sheriff Daron Hall. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Nick.
Nice to see you again. Nice to have you on. And
thank you very much.
You brought a guest with you this morning, and I'll let you introduce him, because I think this is a first. You've been coming on, the two of us, for a long time. First time you brought a guest, so he must be someone special.
He is very special. This is Jim Gondles.
Hi, Jim.
Nice to meet you.
He's the executive director of the American Correctional Association, and based out of Alexandria, Virginia, basically Washington, and helps the field of corrections. Really, it manages and he manages the association, but really the issues that are pressing for all of us that are running correctional institutions. And the other thing I think is worth noting, and I've always found very appealing to me, is that Jim is a retired sheriff as well. And most sheriffs in the country really don't come to the role of sheriff with a corrections background. It's typically the street law enforcement role. And so when you run into a sheriff who understands corrections, which is really my passion, I've always been attracted to that and very, very interested in Jim and the work that he does. And I was very fortunate many years later to be a part of the American Correctional Association. I became, I think, the first sheriff to ever be the president of it. I took a lot of pride in that, but it was really because of Jim's leadership that I could be, I think, as interested, because he understands that jails are really many more jails than prisons, many more people in jail than there are in prisons. And we have issues that we need to get our hands around in the world of corrections and law enforcement. And so that led us to today, and really we set out several months ago to ask the American Correctional Association to come to Nashville and certify all of our officers that are working with the mentally ill population. And we start that this morning, and we're going to run all week. It's just something, I think, and the analogy is this, that we train our officers to carry guns in case they ever have to use them. The likelihood an officer in our agency ever uses their gun is very minimal. The likelihood that you run into a mentally ill inmate is 100%. We do not haven't trained you to the level we need to prepare you to deal with that population. And starting this morning, or really several months ago, that will no longer be our excuse. We were going to train our folks to the maximum level available, and ACA is the leader in this area. And so they're going to certify all of our officers this week and forevermore. We're committed to doing that.
Jim, he's pounded it into my head over the last several years. The two things, he goes, in my jail, Nick, and again, he's a jail administrator here as it is in Metro. The two things you've always told me is if you could eliminate or address it, it's the drug abuse and the mental illness. The vast majority of everyone behind bars has something, or both, right? And so now I saw, when Carla sent this out to me, I'm like, okay, Carla West, your able assistant, sent this out, and I said, I was wondering when this was coming. True, right? I mean, what percentage of the inmates in jails, in your opinion, are suffering from some type of mental illness?
Oh, well, just mental illness alone, more than 30%. More than 1 out of every 3. Okay. And co-occurring disorders, both drug abuse and mental illness, it can be more than half.
Yeah, more than half. But think about that. You address that, and those folks don't maybe reoffend and come back. You can help them behind bars.
And Nick, I mean, I think if we were hiring you today, God forbid, but if we were hiring you today to come in to work in the institutions, I think our job, my job, is to give you the tools to do that job. Right. And I've been on here for several years talking about.
Oh, you've always talked about this.
But to be honest with you, we aren't doing our staff, and I mean, as long as I'm talking about it, I'm not doing anything about it.
Well, you wanted to, and that's why you're doing this.
Yeah, and you're very familiar with what's going on outside here, where we're building a facility that's going to allow us to divert people into a treatment unit, and that's going to be nice and helpful for people to live and be treated differently that are mentally ill. But it still didn't address the officers that work there, the men and women. We graduated 28 people last week after eight weeks of training. And we want that person to be prepared, if you will, over-prepared to deal with a population that is very difficult. And I think the taxpayer here needs to understand that what we end up in is lawsuits oftentimes because our staff either don't know how to recognize your illness versus your behavior, and how to treat that person while they're incarcerated. Oftentimes it leads to use of force and conflict and sometimes injury. And we want to avoid all of that, and we're trying to get our staff prepared to do just that.
Well, as it says, okay, so this is unprecedented. Nashville-Davidson County becomes the first in the country to require correctional behavioral health certification for all officers who deal with daily mental illness patients or inmates. So, Jim, what is this training about? What are they going to be learning?
They're going to learn how to deal with somebody with mental illness. Too often in the past, when somebody is acting out who has a mental issue, we use force. We send in a CERT team. I was just reading a couple days ago, there's a jail about the same size as Davidson County where an inmate was killed because he was mentally ill and he had pulled the sprinkler head off of his cell, and it was causing a lot of disruption in the jail. And the CERT team came in, and sometime during the altercation, the inmate passed away. Well, all that's going to do is just cause lawsuits towards that jail. And it's like Sheriff Hall said, we've got to train them to be equipped on how to deal with somebody with mental illness.
Remind folks, if you would, what a CERT team does. I mean, I know, but they go in and they aggressively subdue an individual. Sometimes, you know, they have to get physical, right?
They do, and they're trained to do that. And unfortunately, we train them very well on CERT, but we haven't been training them, as Sheriff Hall said, on how to diffuse a problem so that you don't end up with a death or an injury to the CERT team officer or to the correctional officer.
Well, okay, give me an example. That's a good one you threw out there. In that case, how might they have done something differently?
Well, they could have called in a multidisciplinary team, which is one of the things that we're trying to train people on, where you have maybe someone from the healthcare office, the medical office, you have a correctional officer who's trained in this, you have a shift supervisor who's trained in this, and they come in and talk to the individual. That, you know, they are obviously going to have to stop the flooding first.
But they know how to talk to them differently.
They do.
They're coming in there and they try to talk. And
they know how to diffuse the situation and prevent injury to both the inmate and to the staff.
It's almost like, you know, those crisis negotiators with the police department that sometimes have to talk someone off a ledge or something like that. Is that kind of along the lines?
It is. Nick, I think that's a good way of the comparison. The kind of the CERT team deal is very comparable to SWAT.
Yeah, right.
And then the negotiation in the field that you often see is very similar to what we're doing in-house. Is we're trying to, oftentimes, I mean, people don't understand this, but we're trying to prevent you from harming yourself. A lot of times in the field, oftentimes, and granted there are some potential suicide issues out there, but what you see SWAT responding to is preventing you from harming other people most of the time, hostages or neighbors or whatever. Our world, the most difficult part of what we do when dealing with the mentally ill is oftentimes preventing them harming themselves or staff. A mentally ill person, it could be, as you can imagine, is coming off the streets right now. I mean, we're booking someone right now. And the likelihood that they're duly diagnosed and have all sorts of self-medicated addictions going on. And so we're trying to assess all that, and we're trying to train our staff to deal with it, to protect yourself physically. But oftentimes I think what we've done is train that person to, if you're threatened physically, here's how you deal with that person. And obviously that line is very thin. It's just like it is in the streets with the shootings and things that you read a lot about in the streets. Our challenge is to train the staff to better identify what is causing that individual to act that way and what can I do to diffuse the situation. And it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy because you're really trying to detox a person a lot of times, trying to get that cleared up and also identify and get that person to comply with where you need them to go and what you need them to do. I saw recently on CNN, CNN did a kind of hour-long show. I think her name is Lisa Ling, is that right? She does some really deep...
Does the investigative stuff.
Yeah, she did a really good kind of a documentary on the Los Angeles County Jail. And just so you know, it's the largest mental health institution in the country.
I've been there. That place is monstrous.
It is a bizarre place from corrections.
You get lost in there.
It is. But they show some really interesting things. I thought she did a good job on her documentary about, you know, staff and how you deal with someone who is screaming and throwing urine and stuff on you. The point of it is you can't react in an angry way and try to force a person to see the rules and understand what to do and understand the ramifications of your actions. most of these people who are mentally ill don't understand the rules, don't understand the ramifications, and so threatening someone with what you're going to do to them is not going to help a person who's suffering. But they show some really good people doing their job the right way and trying to calm and de-escalate this person. And you can tell the individuals who understand that work in corrections and the people who I think, quite frankly, are looking for the next action. Yeah. And we don't need those people working in corrections that are looking for the next action. It's a difficult thing to do. And but I think we as leaders need to first, if we're going to say that 35% of these people, whatever the numbers are suffering from mental illness, I think we need to equip them with better tools to do that job, and quite frankly, we haven't always done that here, and this is our commitment to doing it.
All right, listen, we're going to take a break on that note. We'll get into more details on what kind of changes do you think this will mean if it works for you, for the taxpayers, and everyone else. And we can open up phone lines too. We're going to talk about this issue here, but I know, Jim, you are involved with all types of issues relating to the sheriff's departments across the country. So we can get into some more of that as well. If some of you at home have just questions about what's happening, 615-737-7587. We'll be back with more of our conversation. Your calls if you want to join us as well right after this. Stay with us.